Hey everyone, welcome back to the MEDIN webinar series. This month we're diving into the topic of unlocking ocean knowledge, the global push for better data sharing. We have two fantastic speakers today, Adam Leadbetter and Pierluigi Buttigieg, who will take us through the evolving international landscape of marine data sharing and how the UN Ocean Decade is reshaping the way the world produces, manages and uses ocean information. There'll be time for questions after each presentation, so please feel free to drop your thoughts and questions into the Q&A as we go and upvote other people's questions. For information, we also have Claire Postlethwaite, who is the coordinator of MEDIN, available if you have any questions about how the UK and MEDIN fit into the global data landscape. So before we dive in, I'd just like to set the scene and reflect on why the discussion matters, particularly in relation to us within the MEDIN community and within the UK marine community. So for those that are new to the webinar series or that haven't heard of MEDIN before, we're the Marine Environmental Data and Information Network, and we're a network of organisations in the UK working to promote a culture of open, consistent and responsible marine data sharing. Our standards, our guidelines and our community of practice aims to make marine data more discoverable, better documented and easier to reuse. The challenges that we work on, like interoperability, stewardship, metadata standardization and community capacity, are shared globally. There is close alignment between national initiatives like MEDIN and international frameworks that are trying to bring the world's ocean data systems together. I won't go into too much detail about the Ocean Decade itself, because Adam will be talking about that in depth very shortly. But what's useful to highlight here is that MEDIN is already engaged in this global movement in several ways. So just to explain this slide a little bit, on the top of the screen, there are broad areas that MEDIN contributes expertise in. So data standards, cataloguing and discovery, building data stewardship skills across the UK marine community, and producing guidance and best practice. These are exactly the kinds of things the Ocean Decade is encouraging globally. So a lot of what MEDIN has been doing nationally is feeding into and aligning with wider international efforts. Along the bottom of the screen are some of the international initiatives that MEDIN contributes to, either directly or that the wider MEDIN network are involved in and share knowledge with. It's not an exhaustive list by any means. And today's talks will show how our national expertise fits into the broader digital ecosystem being built across the decade within the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. So today's presentations, first we'll hear from Adam, who will introduce the Decade Coordination Office for Ocean Data Sharing and talk about how they're supporting the global community and helping shape the decade's digital ecosystem. And then we'll hear from Pierluigi, who will talk through the implementation plan through the Ocean Decade's data and information strategy. With that, I will hand over to our first speaker, Adam.
Thanks, Rosanna, and thanks everybody for joining, and thank you to MEDIN as well for the opportunity to introduce the work that we're doing through the Decade Coordination Office for Ocean Data Sharing. I also have to acknowledge at the start of this talk that the Decade Coordination Office for Ocean Data Sharing is only possible because of the support that we receive for the work from Fondation NG. And we're also very grateful to the International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange and the Project Office in Ostend, who host the Decade Coordination Office on behalf of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. So what I want to do in this presentation is really just kind of give people a brief introduction to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, what it is that the decade is trying to achieve, and then an introduction to how in the DCO for Ocean Data Sharing we are supporting a particular area of the activity in the decade and supporting the projects and programs that are going on in the decade to create a digital representation of the ocean. So the decade is focused on 2030, which is kind of the end of the decade. And in terms of that focus, it's about transformation, maybe a kind of organizational transformation, a kind of societal transformation around ocean science. So the kind of tagline, the slogan for the decade is the science we need for the ocean that we want. And that science that we need and the ocean that we want is focused on benefit to societies. The outcomes of the decade really are organized around societal benefit. And there's these 7 outcomes that the decade is working towards by 2030. So a clean ocean, a healthy ocean, a productive ocean, a predicted ocean, a safe ocean, an accessible ocean, and an inspiring ocean. And I guess, when I kind of came into working in the decade 12 months ago, I would probably have said, data and data sharing underpins all of these things in some way, but it's probably most important to a predicted ocean and maybe an accessible ocean. But data feeds into all of these things, and I've seen more and more that actually that kind of bias that I was giving it of the predicted ocean and the accessible ocean in terms of digitally accessible was probably, from my own kind of experience and my own kind of place of thinking, I'd say data really is equally important in all of these things. And I think some of the initiatives that we've seen that are going on, not just in the decade, but around the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, even show that in the inspiring ocean as well. So from the DCO, we'll be running a webinar in February, just a little plug, where we're going to be having the people who have worked with Minecraft to put together a Minecraft ocean sciences piece, talking to us about how they created that. And so you can see that even data and some of the things that we're talking about feed into inspiring people to connect to the ocean as well. So we achieve the outcomes by answering 10 challenges, and I'm not going to read through all of the challenges on the screen. That would be a bit dull. But I think I think here we can see that maybe challenges 7 and 8 underpin everything else. Expanding the global ocean observing system, creating a digital representation of the ocean. And then maybe challenges 9 and 10, the skills and knowledge for all, and changing humanity's relationship with the ocean, maybe sit at the top of these challenges. And then the challenges 1 to 6 form maybe a layer in the middle where kind of the data and the observation and the data are flowing through all of those first 6 challenges, and then changing humanity's relationship with the ocean and providing skills, knowledge, and technology accessible for all, addressing the first 6 challenges. So I kind of like to think of the challenges in that sense. We're going to spend the rest of this presentation, though, really thinking a little bit more in depth about challenge 8, creating a digital representation of the ocean. So over the last, in 2024 and 2025, there was a strategic ambition setting process for the UN Ocean Decade. So it was recognized that after a few years of activity, maybe it should be focused around some certain areas. And this was called the Vision 2030 process. For each of the challenges, each of the 10 challenges, a white paper was written by a group of experts from across the community. And you can see a link to a summary of that white paper on the slide. And really for challenge 8, for creating a digital representation of the ocean, there's 4 key areas that were identified as foundations for a comprehensive digital ocean ecosystem. I'm not going to talk too much about implementing this because it's really a lot of what Pierluigi will go into, but I just want to give a kind of high-level overview of how we're approaching this from the DCO. But these foundations for the comprehensive digital ocean ecosystem are an ocean data discovery and access service, and a comprehensive global ocean data discovery and access service. An organizational and technical structure that's sitting across the globe for ocean forecasting, a global digital atlas of the ocean, and enhanced capacity development. So the data discovery and access service is probably really what we have now in the Ocean Data Information System, ODIS, plus a bit. So the way that ODIS is set up is as a federated and distributed global service, and rightly so, but at the moment we don't have the data access piece in there. And I think, you know, one of the things that we need to look at over the next little while is how do we make sure that we're working well with data access brokers like ERDAP and others, and how do we get the software tools in place to access and federate access across the global distributed service that we have at the moment. But also, on top of that, we need to build relevant products that can help us address the challenges and bring about the societal benefits of the decade, particularly things like maps for ocean pollution, continuing to develop biodiversity information for OBIS, and then also having a data sharing help desk, having an operational place that the global community can come to and discuss issues around ocean data sharing. And that's something that we've kind of piloted in the Decade Coordination Office, and hope to maybe bring eventually into the International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange. Again, I think eventually we probably need a distributed ocean data ingestion service. So in Europe, we have eModNet, which provides an example of this. I'll talk a little bit in a little bit of time about private sector and our engagement with private sector. I think in particular, as we maybe see private sector data ramping up more and more to fill gaps that are left by particular economic situations and geopolitical situations in the normal research observing systems, we're going to need that distributed ocean data ingestion service more and more. And then we do need to continue to grow our persistent identification of key information components. So then on the global structure for ocean forecasting, this is being particularly implemented by our colleagues from Mercator Ocean, who lead the Decade Collaborative Center for Ocean Prediction. So again, some keywords here, federated and distributed, and this is a federated and distributed global framework for ocean forecasting, particularly looking at harmonized methods and common architecture and operational readiness levels of forecasting systems, and how to grow from maybe lower levels of operational readiness in ocean forecasting systems to higher levels, working with creating data standards for ocean forecasting data, and that's ongoing activity right now, and also collaborating with efforts to create digital twins of the ocean. And then the third pillar is a global digital atlas of the ocean. The idea here is to create a flagship decade product to highlight the impact of the decade and progress towards addressing the challenges through the content that is going into that atlas. So it's probably not going to be raw data and raw data layers, but far more synthesized information layers. I've taken an example here from islands marine atlas. I could have done this for European Atlas of the Seas or something similar. But the idea from the screen grab on the right is to show that you can bring together information about key observing systems, sentinel sites. You can bring together information about ocean fronts, so physical oceanography, and you can bring together bathymetry, and then maybe you would be able to do things like maritime spatial planning through a system like that. So that particular system has been operational for a while, but we're in the process now of kind of working through. I'm sorry, some of the bullet points there are not quite right for this slide. We're in the process of working through what the initial content of that is going to be, and we're going to launch that in April 2027 at the UN Decade Conference in Rio. And then on the enhanced capacity development side, we've been doing a lot of outreach. So a lot of things like at the UN Ocean Conference in Nice, we had an in-person help desk, and that reached everybody from school children to government ministers. We have a lot of material, and we'll be bringing some of that material and the help desk to the Ocean Sciences meeting in Glasgow in February. And we also run our own webinar series and also training courses through Ocean Teacher Global Academy. So with the team from Ocean Teacher Global Academy, we've now led a course on data quality and ocean data quality issues. And we've also partway through a course on building communities of practice around ocean data sharing. We'll be running both of those courses again later in the year. So our engagement strategy is really, this has evolved over the last 12 months. And in particular, I think what we're doing at the moment is there are 800 projects and programs in the decade. We've spoken to many of them, but coordinating those 800 projects individually is kind of quite difficult. And so what we have done is we've kind of started trying to work with national decade committees, because the national decade committees have a really good overview and a really good relationship with the projects and programs that are happening organized through their countries. And we've been creating opportunities for dialogue with those national decade committees and the national oceanographic data centers and associated data units, as well as OBIS nodes where those exist in those countries. So dialogues with the UK National Decade Committee, the British Oceanographic Data Centre and MEDIN, really useful in order to flag the importance of National Decade Committee, National Oceanographic Data Centres in the global data landscape, associated data units in the global data landscape, and connecting to IODE activity, but also helping the National Oceanographic Data Centres and the associated data units to understand what's going on in country around the decade and what activity there is to enable them to then follow up and archive data that's been created through decade actions. So we have a number of publications as well. So we've been publishing, socioeconomic data sharing guideline is work in progress, hopefully coming out in the next quarter. Citizen science data sharing guideline should only be a couple of weeks away. And with a team of experts from the Global IODE committee, we updated the guidelines for an ocean project data management plan. And I just want to highlight a little bit this last advancing ocean data sharing for sustainable development in areas within national jurisdiction. So that was a recommendation from the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission Assembly in June, that the data policy should be adopted by member states. The UK does a great job of this already for work that is happening and has been licensed in national jurisdiction, with the work of the Crown Estate and the Marine Data Exchange. And we're kind of holding that up as a good example, as an example of good practice for other member states to follow. And we've seen similar success stories in the likes of Australia and Brazil. And we have a working group that is encouraging data sharing from all activity that is licensed within national jurisdiction. Similarly, then, we also work a lot with the private sector to stimulate private sector data sharing. And we're having success there. At the moment, I'm working with a particular company in France that's a well-known company that works within the marine area, and we're working with them to connect their data to EMODnet, some of their physical oceanography data that they hold. And we have many other private sector companies where we're working through this. We're sharing data to Seabed 2030. We're sharing data to OBIS as well that hadn't been shared before and been locked away. There is a vast amount of data that can help not just the decade, but the whole of ocean science that is currently sitting probably not particularly well managed, maybe not even on servers, inside enterprise that operates within the ocean domain. And so there's a lot of conversation going on about how do we unlock that practically. So yeah, just a reminder then of what the foundations for a comprehensive digital ocean ecosystem are, and I'm sure Pierluigi will go into far more detail on these in his presentation as well. So thank you very much for your attention and for listening.
Thanks, Adam. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A. I see that there is one there already. So the first question is, can you give a little bit more detail on the importance of data and information networks like MEDIN to the UN Ocean Decade?
Yeah, thanks. So I think, for me, a network like MEDIN has the contacts already with many of the leaders of decade actions within the UK. And I think, what we're really looking for is the long-term secure data management of the data that's being collected by the projects and programs that have been endorsed by the decade. And so to me, a network like MEDIN is vital in us being able to achieve that goal and that strategy that I kind of talked about of connecting the activity that the national decade committees are aware of to a group like MEDIN can really facilitate that, where it's quite, it's much more local facilitation. The relationships are already there. For us at a global level, we're another step removed from that. So groups like MEDIN and National Oceanographic Data Centers are really helpful in that.
Could I chime in just briefly on that too?
Of course, yeah, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, and also, when we were setting up Otis to help different systems share information, we always used MEDIN as an example of getting nationally organized and coordinated, because again, this is a UN sort of framework. And as we all know, there are different regulations from country to country, digital sovereignty requirements, etc. So one of the greatest values is that if every country had something like MEDIN, then at the global scale, you'd have to worry a lot less that the data that you're acquiring has passed quality control, complies with local laws and regulations. That's all sort of covered, Crown Estate requirements, etc. So I think that's, again, another dimension of how networks like MEDIN on an international scale with the nations as components can greatly facilitate confidence in sharing data, ingesting it, and making sure that you're not breaking any regional or national regulations or laws.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. I'll just give you the option, Claire. I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have anything to add from MEDIN's perspective on this as well?
Yeah, I suppose I'm just thinking about the fact that our seas don't respect national boundaries. So right from MEDIN's inception, we've always been really ensuring that what we do at a UK level aligns with the developments internationally. So yeah, I suppose it's something that's been embedded in MEDIN right from the start. Yeah, so that's really been key to how we've been able to help facilitate that sharing on the global level.
Thank you. Okay, so next question. How will you measure the impact of data sharing in the UN Ocean Decade?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think for me, it's actually something that we're working on at the moment. Like, what does impact and impact of data sharing look like? And I think, to me, how we communicate that and how we measure it depends on the audience that we're talking to. So for more kind of academic researchers, then we're promoting data citation and proper data publication with digital object identifiers, and then data citation. We're also very keen on, because of that relationship we have with the private sector, they don't buy into that. Doesn't affect them if they get cited. So what? They're far more interested in the kind of numeric, the financial value, and so something like the cost benefit analysis that MEDIN has done is very helpful in that regard. Storytelling is massively helpful in terms of engaging the private sector. Taking stories to CEOs is more important than citations for them. And then I think, again, modeling some of the work that's already happened, MEDIN have done with OECD around value chain mapping as well. So some of that to help organize those stories is really important too. So I think it's not a one size fits all answer. I think some of it is dependent on who it is we're talking to, and that's work in progress as well, how we do that.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how are you getting to grips with what knowledge and products end users, policy and decision makers need to have access to, and therefore what data needs to flow into these?
Yeah. So I think, again, this is something that is continually evolving, and something that we are very lucky that we're not the only Decade Coordination Office. There are around 13 Decade Coordination Offices, I think it's 13 or 14 coordination offices and collaborative centres. And so some of those are thematic, right? So some of them deal with things like sustainable blue economy, coastal resilience, and these kinds of things. They're much closer to the decision makers, the policy makers. And so us working with them, alongside them, and getting information from them helps to drive some of that. And this is how we're building products, particularly like the Atlas, is in consultation with them. And there are some ongoing initiatives across the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission to get some of these member state needs and some of the information product needs better documented as well.
Thank you. One last question, and then we'll move on to Pierluigi's talk. If there's any more questions that come through afterwards, or while Pierre's talking, we'll just have an open discussion session at the end and cover anything that we've got left over. So next question is, how can I get involved in any aspect of this project, if that's appropriate to ask?
Yeah, send an email to, I'll put my email in the chat, but it's a.leadbetter@unesco.org, and we can have a conversation that way, or we're building a community practice, so we do have our own webinars and things like that. You can follow along the Decade Coordination Office. We have a LinkedIn channel as well. Any of those ways are kind of simple ways of getting involved, but yeah, feel free to drop me an email and we can have more of a conversation about that.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to Pierluigi's talk, and I'll hand over to Pierluigi.
Right, you can see the screen, correct?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So yes, I'm just going to give you an overview of where we're at with the UN Ocean Decades Data and Information Strategies Implementation Plan, which we've been working on ever since the strategy was released a couple of years ago. The form, we'll go through the contents and the sections that we have right now in the draft, which are subject to change, thus the potential in the title. And yes, welcome your questions on how it works and the content therein. So the status of it, the final draft of the plan, which is quite lengthy, it has multiple angles to look at the problem, or rather to look at the implementation case for the strategy, the UN Ocean Decade Data and Information Strategy. The draft was completed in October or November last year, and it's under review by the DCU, the Decade Coordination Unit, and the DCO ODS, where Adam sits. The feeling there is that we wrote a very technically oriented document for implementation teams in the sense of people who are coding or organizational leads who are managing those people. And a higher level document may be more, let's say, approachable to the action leads of the decade right now. That being said, the technical details that we created will be released in one form or another. We have a European project, Marco Polo, running right now, and a deliverable that's related to recommendations for future data management plans and approaches in marine science and other aspects. So perhaps some of them will come out there. We'll keep everyone posted on that, and of course link these artifacts so they're not sort of lost in the wind. It's just how the machine runs. Again, my funding, as I come into this, working on several European projects, some of which have concluded, like World Fair with CoData, which is trying to link and interoperate ocean data with everything from nanomaterials to culture to museum collections, etc., and a couple of marine biodiversity projects which are focused on data. The context, and for those of you who saw my MEDIN keynote at your meeting some time ago, the situation hasn't changed. In fact, it's gotten a little bit more dire. The context that we're working in is a world with weakening multilateralism. There is an increased desire for data sovereignty, but also technological sovereignty. So walls are going up, new policies, new laws, new restrictions on data sharing are emerging. They will percolate down to ocean science and ocean activity in general. New regulatory frameworks are emerging. There are new marketplaces. Competition has changed entirely with, let's say, the AI approaches. People are still confused about what to do, what not to do, etc. And there's different digital cultures afoot. And all of that leads into this kind of phenomenon known as cyber balkanization, or the arising of the splinternet. As we've seen, the developments over the last few decades with countries like the US, Russia, China, Iran now most recently, the ability to cut yourself off from the global internet and therefore from global data sharing, it's increasing, and states and organizations are prioritizing those kind of capacities. So how do we address this as oceanographers, as people who care about the ocean? How do we prepare our data systems to be able to fulfill the decade's goals? And as Adam has presented, it's digital strategies. Well, before the decade started, or on the onset of the decade, we came up with a pre-committee, so a management through an intersectional working group, some general recommendations about how to prepare for this. Mainly, you have control over your organization and your system, so it's time to get that in order and make sure that you're meeting your local challenges and have a good handle of your data. And again, MEDIN is a very good example of this, federating hundreds of organizations nationally, and make sure that your fitness for purpose, we hear this phrase said a lot, is clear and well documented. Once you have that, you can start flexibly projecting your data and metadata out to global regional consumers that you wish to work with, using open standards or agreeing on some kind of oligolateral standard. Once you have that, then you can start building those relationships through data sharing, bringing together the technical aspect with the governance aspect until there's a very clear flow and relationship. We've seen this emerge before. We're talking to each other over the internet and the web right now. The meteorological systems have figured this out. So it's entirely possible. It's just a little different from what we're used to. So when we had the actual strategy document, the data and information strategy, with its vision of creating this global data system that can be used for decision making. And that's an important point. When we're writing these things, it's not just for the sake of having ocean data circulating around, but again, the UN Ocean Decade of Science for Sustainable Development, there has to be a purpose which is about changing something, managing the ocean a little bit more effectively, conserving the ocean that much more effectively, etc. So those objectives that you see at the bottom, the development of that ecosystem, all right, that's a technical and also governance, organizational relationships, improving data and information discovery and usability. We've seen progress on that via Otis and other systems like Seabed 2030, for example, being able to sort of harvest, centralize, standardize information and improve that discovery aspect of it. Trust building, it's there. We know our trusted partners, but it's still getting there in terms of it's not as trusted as the global financial data system, for example, when we do our banking transactions. We're still building the technical capacity for that, but global relationships are being catalyzed by the decade. Objective 4 is very important. Going back to that idea, there are lots of possibilities. It's an exciting time in the whole data world, but it's also time to prioritize those digital solutions, those data solutions that actually make an impact. And that's a very astute question there. How do we know that they're making an impact? And that's also part of this idea of empowering communities to let people who are sharing data, letting them know that their data is having a positive or negative impact on their local community. That is another side of the data maturation approach that we have to think of. So great, we have those objectives, we have the plan that was written, and now it's time to bring it about. It's trying to bring it into existence with some guidance about how do we actually fulfill this plan. I'm an ontologist, so I like to define words before we start. A group was convened, myself and Kevin O'Brien chairing that group. This is a photo of some of that group membership, and others are here. Quite good global coverage from organizations that are governmental, intergovernmental, regional organizations, academia, private sector, others. So we had quite a good coverage, good input, and good revision of what we were writing as we went along. We then wrote the document over quite a long time with lots of consultations at different meetings, at different UN Ocean conferences, and others. And yes, this table of contents just to give you an idea of what we'll go through. So after outlining things like the core principles of what are the core implementation principles, what sort of architectural notions are we going to use to build this thing or implement the strategy, also recognizing that there are different readers of the document, they will read the document in different ways, so a section on how to actually use that, and then an introduction to the core implementation concepts, we'll talk about them a little bit later, and then dealing with each objective and saying, all right, here is a suggested implementation pathway within that implementation framework that we suggest that you explore. Of course, recognizing that there's no one size fits all, but this will just get people talking in the right direction. Then a section on different kinds of user profiles and stories about how they would use this implementation plan, which sections they may read, may prioritize, who they may reach out to for information. So we wrote a few of those just to help, again, on consultation with the co-authors. They said that would be quite a helpful section to have. So they're present. Then recognizing a lot of the users will be scientists, and scientists tend to think in terms of projects, like planning a project, gathering samples, then generating data. We said, all right, let's follow a standard research project. It could be scientific, it could be corporate, it could be whatever you wish. Following that logic, let's just try to augment that a little bit with the view from the data strategy. What kind of data considerations should you be having as you move across, that sort of thing. Then a nice section on metrics and key performance indicators. This is quite important because, again, many metrics exist which are not actually very informative about the data itself. They're more organizational metrics, or they're more tokenistic metrics, like the number of data sets you have, how big is a data set? There are many ways to look at those. So some recommendations about improving metrics. A glossary, quite an extensive glossary about terminology, and then a set of annexes, which are quite important too, again, expanding on those core principles. And Annex 4 and 5, primarily 4, is quite important. Again, a sort of framework for how to evaluate one's own data readiness. Is your data ready for action in this global ecosystem that we've been talking about? So very tersely, just going through some of the ideas there, mostly to stimulate discussion and to prepare you for some of the guidance that will be forthcoming. So the core principles, digital architecture, and immediate actions that people can take. The core principles, we narrowed them down to 3: ethics, competency, and multilateralism. Ethics, I think of course, we all talk about it, but very few organizations actually perform ethical analyses, evaluating the harms and potential benefits of releasing data, who it may affect, how it may affect them. Often people don't really know. It's hard to tell, of course, but some effort in that direction is extremely important, particularly with the care principles and indigenous data sharing, also emphasizing that ethical considerations need to be put about. Of course, we're always enthusiastic to share more data, but often that can have consequences that were not foreseen. Competency is another one that I think is key to this plan. Again, there shouldn't be a rush to fame, a sort of data rush, a gold rush, where people says, well, look at my interface and look what I can do. The competency, whatever is being generated has to actually work. It actually has to impact something in a precisely defined way. And so you can say, yes, it worked, or no, it didn't. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you're just releasing data. But again, the functionality, the technical quality, etc., of that data should be well documented. Multilateralism, as we've discussed before, in the appendix and the annex, we go through what that actually means. But again, we're working in a multilateral framework and also a pluralistic framework. You can't control what other systems do, but you can sort of say, well, let's just try to move in this direction. So those core principles, even if people don't follow any of the technical advice, if they have these principles in mind, the decade is moving things in the right direction. The architectural model, and again, at the MEDIN keynote, I think last year, we went through that. The idea that it's time to sort of help people place what they do within a sort of rational architecture. Are they a data store? Are they a service that is a mediation service, like an ERDAP server? As Adam said, we know about where things are through, let's say, metadata layers, like Otis would represent the sort of web work that you see across the different layers of this fabric. So we may know where things are, but is there an access or a mediation service that allows you to harvest data from different kinds of storage solutions, deliver it into data products and platforms, and then take it down to applications? Very often what we see is things get stovepiped. Every application has its own little ecosystem, and it's very hard to get inside it. So we're trying to say, hey, look, open it out, make it more modular, and things will be better. And this metadata flow, and again, Otis has gotten part of the way there, and other organizations certainly have their own solutions. That metadata flow can be teased apart between brokerage services and products and applications to really give information about what is being talked about. There's so much data out there. You have to know that before one pulls the trigger to access that data and move potentially terabytes of data over, it is what you need, it fits your requirements, and you can actually use it. And then we save a lot of carbon on the way. We've hybridized that a little bit with notions from a data mesh architecture, particularly things concerning data products. Again, the objective of that is to just sort of instill in the community that a data product isn't simply some data set you dump on a FTP server or on a web front end or an API. Those are nice, but a data product has a consumer and it has an ownership team that makes sure that that product is being produced well, consistently, and that it meets requirements that are set. This is key for fitness for purpose and will help, again, mature the digital ecosystem. So when you have a data product, you know what you're buying, so to speak, right? Like your fridge won't break because it meets certain requirements. Data products are no different. I say as my fridge is making strange sounds. Then 4 and 5, the concepts and the plan. So once we actually have the core architecture, we reuse this model. It's been around for a while, the ESAO model. Many of you may know it, where you have ecosystem strategies, architectures, so your implementation of your technical system, and your organizing aspects. Your organizing means your organizational procedures and processes and policies, how you run things in your local organization. So for each objective, we sort of reflected on how to navigate one's internal organizational strategies, architectures, and organizing processes with how you work with ecosystem partners. That's a useful framework for what we're trying to do. It's very similar to what IBM and other companies went through in the 80s to 90s, where they opened up from stovepipe systems. They would build their own machines, their own software, to what we have today, and an ecosystem of parts and software, etc., to make things more efficient. So for each one of the objectives, so for example, objective 2, we describe how one would move and how one as an organization would look at each layer and start to assess how they would go about modifying their internal operations, their internal technologies, their internal strategy for long-term considerations to what's happening in the decade's ecosystem, and also how to assert themselves in that ecosystem. Again, it's not a passive role, everyone shapes it. Of course, every step, some of them are more complicated than others, because especially if you're consulting with outside groups or empowering outside groups, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to think about. And we, again, wrote down a sort of framework to help people reflect on perhaps how they would plan to go about that. Again, the user profiles and stories that we had there. We had a few. I won't really go through them, but you can imagine we would then anticipate others as people contact the DCO ODS or others, they might share their own user stories to say, look, this is what works, this is what doesn't, this is how we need things to change. Again, now we're at the recommended actions for projects. At this stage, it's important to remember that these recommendations are largely the same. We're just packaging them differently for different readers. So again, for somebody who's running a project, this is where they would probably start in the document. That how to use this document section at the beginning will help people read the right section as we go. So it's fairly traditional. However, what we're trying to make the community realize is that when you're planning a research project and you're collecting your data, people think of data starting here, but we're sort of saying, look, it's starting at the very beginning when you're doing your project planning. Even at that stage, you should be storing and archiving metadata, plans, DMPs, project agreements, legal agreements, etc. You should have sharing mechanisms in place which are separate from your publishing mechanisms. This is not just about releasing data with an academic publication or a white paper. Data should be continuously shared according to policies, of course, and then using all of that to grow the capacity and digital capacity. So again, we reframed that project flow into something a little bit more data-centric and data-focused. This is what some of them look like. When you're planning, make sure that you're including the right people, the right competences. This is actually quite rare. Most of the time, especially with scientific projects, you don't necessarily have your data engineers at the table to help you make sure that the data is flowing smoothly from the very beginning. Co-designing it, of course, with those that you impact. That will also help with indicators. That will also help with impact assessments. And then trying to align with recommendations such as the ones that we will release here. Same thing when it comes to what we talked about before. As multilateralism weakens, it's time to take things like licenses very, very seriously. A lot of the times, as we've seen in Otis, many systems don't even release the license of a certain data product or a data set or a data service, and we wouldn't know if we can use it or not. So again, revisiting that and putting a spotlight on those aspects of data that we need to make things flow smoothly. That metrics and key performance indicators, as said before, it's time to, as we move through what we'll see later, data readiness levels and these pathways of implementation, it's time to think about metrics that are reporting more accurately on the data as opposed to things that are more whitewashy, cyberwashy, as we say, like number of data sets, which is great, but ultimately not very helpful. So we give some advice. So for example, that using proportions are very useful. So for example, the number of data sets that are described by full metadata, documented and described somewhere in your organization as a percentage, that's hugely useful. The number of data sets that have PIDs that are permanent on the web and that have been validated, or the number of data sets that have passed a well-documented and publicly available quality control process, 100% being great, that's useful. That is an indicator that the organization has taken certain quality control steps very, very seriously and is opening up that process to the world. That's the same thing that we require for products, manufactured products. It's not that different for data. So again, the importance of making sure that those metrics are not just coming out in a report from time to time when an organization needs to, or when it's trying to look good or let people know what it's doing. It should be a continuous reporting thing that's synced to your metadata catalogs, etc. So that's the body of it. And then there are the annexes and supplementary sections. Those annexes are important. They're often referred to across all sections. That's why they're an annex. But we start off with a very extensive glossary. It's quite a lot, going through terms that we hear all the time that often have this or that meaning depending on who we talk to. We try to stabilize the semantics early on so we know exactly what we're talking about when we refer to it. So again, quite extensive, but at least that's a good basis to start with so that there's no ambiguity in implementation. Your engineers can't deal with ambiguity. Annex 4 is perhaps one of the most important ones, this data readiness levels. We broke it down into phases where it's time to characterize what you want to do, assemble a metadata catalog, and start actually creating publicly available indices of your data. Otis partners have done this. MEDIN has done this. Many organizations, it's hard to actually, many of them internally don't even know what they have. They have to ask people. So again, one of the first steps is getting that data and metadata assembled that describes all of the content that's inside your system. This next phase would be refinement and provenance tracking. So once you have the data and metadata, time to curate it. That means staffing for data curation, data validation. AI can get you so far, but at the end of the day, you need a stamp of approval on it. And that is some risk, which you need a human, I think, to double check and to make sure your provenance information is full. Phase 3 is then you start to deliver the data out into the ecosystem. That's where we overlap with the idea of data products, like saying, okay, this is how we want it to be represented and shared according to requirements or according to open standards. As we go up higher in the data readiness level, still in phase 3, the idea of some other third-party system, again, this is an ecosystem. So a third-party system that has nothing to do with yours should be able to discover, verify that the data exists, verify the diagnostics, and work with it, verifying that the open standards have been followed, is the sort of gold standard that the ecosystem partner said, yes, we bought your product, it works, 5-star review in our little ecosystem marketplace. Annex 5, it was a little bit of it was an idea from Louis Demard, who found the Bill of Rights for manufactured products, and we sort of looked at that and said, well, we need a sort of Bill of Rights for users for the Ocean Decade. I mean, when I get a data product and it has a nice UN Ocean Decade stamp on it, I would like it to be transparent. I would like to know exactly where it came from, who worked on it, etc. I would like to be able to access not just it, but also its parts, so it's not wrapped up in a proprietary product. And this, again, these are following very much the manufactured products Bill of Rights. If there's encryption used, it should be used, let's say, by necessity when necessary, and not in order to impede people's usage. And again, if I'm releasing services and data that I'm celebrating, somebody should be able to access that in 5 years, 10 years, depending on the requirements, and make sure that any software or services that are used don't just evaporate over time. It's important that those are archived, they're containerized, and that they can be used later so that the data that they generate or work on doesn't become inert. So that's the sort of quick overview of where we're at. Again, what it ultimately will look like as the official publication from the decade, yet to be determined, but that's what we've thought about, and that's the content. And one way or another, we'll try to release it. If there are particular questions that any of you would like to know about, myself and Kevin would be happy to oblige. Yeah, so we've done that. It's going to come out. And I think this is the sort of thinking we'll need as we go into a time of greater uncertainty, but also greater opportunity. I mean, it's actually quite an exciting time, but we have to make sure our implementations are not brittle and can stand various tests that are coming our way. I'll stop there then.
Thank you. That's great. As always, if there's any questions, please put them in the Q&A. There was one that came through just as we were handing over, so it might have been meant for Adam. So I'll bring everyone up on the screen and we'll just cover all of the questions. So the first question is how, as we are halfway through the UN Ocean Decade, has the data acquired and shared so far between 2021 and 2025 been able to help guide and drive meaningful change towards the Ocean Decade targets?
Yeah, so I think I'd use a couple of examples very briefly there. I think what we're seeing is the data improving some of the ocean forecasting systems, and then ocean forecasting systems growing. So there's an Opera is a project that's taking ocean forecasting systems out to Africa. There's a lot of work that's been shared where data and models, and using model outputs as data, helping with coastal resilience. So that's a particular area. And then with the deep ocean observing system, we're seeing release of data, particularly towards the ocean biodiversity information system, and that will be helping with some of the work around protecting the ocean and defining appropriate marine protected areas for the 30 by 30 process as well.
Great, thank you. Next question is, this is clearly a very detailed implementation plan. Are all of the organisations involved with the Ocean Decade expected to apply this? And is there any support available?
Right, yes, it is detailed. And again, by design, so to speak, because again, if we're going to implement something, if you're handing this to your data engineering teams or your data managers, they do need detail at a certain level. That being said, this is not something that is prescriptive. It's not something saying you must do this in order to participate in the decades system. It's more saying that these are the considerations about how to modernize, or as Adam said, the transformative notion. This is the sort of digital transformation that will underpin the information, the systems required to deliver information and knowledge products over time. Especially when, I mean, there's even sections in there talking about how to sort of hedge or prepare for things like quantum computing, quantum cryptography, what AI may or may not do for us, and how to make sure that one doesn't get a little bit overhyped on the AI side. So again, yes, it is detailed, but at the same time, it isn't prescriptive. The organizations would be more expected to inform themselves, take a position on that, and also communicate with the decade about what is achievable, what they prioritize, and also what they say this is impossible for us to do. That's very valuable information, because often it's very hard to get information from, I mean, we've done survey after survey, Adam's done many surveys, but it's also hard to get information about what people's real capacities are. So sometimes this plan is sort of saying, look, this is the kind of thing we're thinking about. It is ambitious, yes. Where are you here? What's possible for you here? Yeah. Any support available? That's an excellent question. Adam, is there any support available?
I think in terms of practical support, then please do, we can see what we can do. There are, for people who are involved in the decade as well, there are things, there's an Ocean Matcher facility where you may be able to get resource support through the Ocean Matcher facility. The other thing that I would say that we're exploring with the private sector is internships to help with data organization and data sharing. CPEC 2030 run those. We're looking at them with some other data aggregators as well to see how that might work as a way of providing some of the human support to make some of these things happen. I would just also echo what Pierluigi was saying. The position that a particular organization might take is, actually, I need to work with an organization like MEDIN and the archiving centers that are associated with MEDIN to make a lot of this happen for me. And MEDIN is in a better technical position probably to make some of the further down the line technical things happen. So I think that kind of what should I do kind of question could be actually work with a MEDIN, a BODC, whoever to make sure my data goes there, and then encourage them and see how they're working with other parts of the implementation plan as well.
Great, thank you.
Also in terms of support, I mean, I think, again, the decade was never centrally funded. But again, when I think of things like Otis, a lot of the Otis partners, because they're all sort of aligning to the same implementation framework for something just like Otis, not the whole plan, they're able to help each other. They're saying, well, you're in my region, you're nearby, how do I do this? Can you share some software or some code? So a lot of it is, as much as anything, generating our own support, creating our own communities to say, how did you approach this? And can I roll that out on my system? Could you containerize that software for me? And we see that happening. And I think that's what we need to encourage, because in the last phase of the decade, I don't anticipate there'll be a massive central structure set up. Right now, it's more or less finishing it up and trying to help people diffuse the skills that we've learned through this catalyst.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Just mindful of time. We're 1 minute over the schedule's finished, so I'll just do my wrap-up slides quickly, and then if there's any more questions, and if you can stay, maybe we can cover them afterwards. Or type answers to the questions. Make sure that you get those answers. So if you have any feedback about this session or the webinar series as a whole, please fill out the feedback survey, particularly if you have any suggestions for topics that would be useful for future training sessions. We've reached the end of the initial webinar series, but it's been really well received, so we'd like to keep it going, but maybe in a slightly different form. I'll put the link to the form in the chat as well later. So coming up on the week of the 23rd to the 27th of February, we have our regular free online workshop called Marine Data Management, Governance in the MEDIN Toolset, and that's delivered online through Ocean Teacher Global Academy. And then one final plug, follow us on social media and sign up for our quarterly newsletter to keep updated with what we're up to. Check our website for links to tools and resources. And if you have any questions or thoughts after the session, email us at inquiries@medin.org.uk. Huge thank you to our presenters today, and thank you again for coming. I hope you have enjoyed the session and the webinar series, and have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.